Casey, can you hit the record button, please?
We are recording.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. Today we will discuss cloud governance and specifically the 5 disciplines of cloud governance. For more information about today's program, make sure to check out Scott Dowling's blog on this topic and other useful links located at the end of this presentation. My service ownership blog is also located there as well. Just a little bit about me in case you don't know who I am. I'm Ken Nuebler. I spent 30 years in state government, and my last 7 years I spent with North Carolina launching their Office 365 and Azure services. I also set up the first governance board with North Carolina, the first of its kind, and I'm happy to share some of my experiences later in this presentation. So with me today is Scott Dowling, my colleague and senior cloud strategist with Planet. Scott has over 12 years of cloud consulting at both Planet Technologies and Microsoft. When Scott's not working, he is a world traveler, as you can see from his picture, above taken at the black sand beach in Iceland. Welcome, Scott. We are so glad you're joining with us today on the program.
Thank you, Ken.
So thanks, Scott. So before we get started, I would love to do some anonymous quick polls to see what types of customers we have with us today. We're just going to do a rapid fire couple polls here in the very beginning. Casey's going to go ahead and launch those. We'll review those results at the end of the session during the question period and see how we did with the responses. So first question is, we just want to know who's joining us today, where you're coming from. The next question is all about, do you have a cloud governance in place? M365, Azure, multiple clouds. Just kind of curious where you're coming into this conversation. And then finally, do you have a governance board, council, team, or something else established? Something that's working for you all? We'd love to hear about your experiences on this topic today. So please, during the question time, we'd love to hear what's working for you, what's not working for you, what you wished worked better. So please let us know. And that's it for the polls. So let's jump right into today's topic. First thing we need to know is, what is governance? And we're, before we get started, let's talk about this, right? The word governance means different things to different people. For instance, there's data governance, collaboration governance, tenant governance, but too often organizations only focus on one type of governance and not the entire cloud. So far too often we see organizations with no plan and in some situation, no person or team accountable for their cloud services, which is shocking. And it happens all the time from what we've seen. And for organizations that do provide services to multiple divisions and business units and other organizations as a shared service provider, this is even more important to get right and get a hold of from the very beginning. I think this definition of governance is one of the best around, which is simply put, governance is the set of policies, roles, responsibilities, and processes that guide, direct, and control how an organization's business divisions and IT teams cooperate to achieve business goals. It's all about how do we work together to make sure we achieve the right outcomes, right? This is all about defining services, how they work, what the customers can do, what they can't do, how the services will be supported from an operational standpoint. And that is what today's session is all about and what Scott's going to discuss. Now, today's session is more of an overview and a framework for cloud governance. So if you want to hear a deeper dive into any of the areas that Scott's going to talk about, please fill out the poll at the end of this session so we know how to gear future YouAlreadyOwnIt office hours so we can dive deeper into any one of these. So without any further time wasted, let's get right in here. And Scott, the floor is yours. Please take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ken, and good morning and good afternoon to everybody on the call. Thank you so much for spending some of your day with me to talk about a solution set, if you will, that I'm extremely passionate about. I am the guy that thinks cloud governance is exciting. I hope everybody on the call does too.
I do too.
I
get excited about governance. It's one of my favorite topics.
Absolutely. I promise not to bore everybody to tears. I hope I kept this light and informative. So let's buckle up and get ready for this ride, this thrilling ride through governance. And hopefully I'll convince some of you to join me in my quest for governance perfection. Or you're just going to fall asleep and I'll be talking to an empty room, one or the other. So when we're talking about effective governance, right? Effective governance essentially helps your organization achieve their business objectives by ensuring that you're compliant with regulatory requirements and best practices. It provides essentially a framework for managing your cloud resources. This includes data, applications, infrastructure. It helps to mitigate the risks associated with your cloud adoption, such as data breaches and compliance violations. So we need to talk about a comprehensive strategy, and this strategy should include elements that would be discussed in any security or compliance review, but contain far more than just that. This is why I think it's such a shame that every time that I join a meeting, I'll have meetings on my calendars all the time that say, hey, we're meeting with customer XYZ and we're going to talk about security, compliance, and governance. It's almost never really a governance discussion. It's almost always a security and or compliance discussion. Holistically, governance is a container that has many associated containers within it. Think of it that way, right? And inside of the governance container, you have things such as a security container, a compliance container, cost optimization, risk management, and other things. But those are really four big areas that make up a total discussion. So what happens is when we talk to customers and we start talking about, say, quote unquote, governance, it generally dives into a security or a compliance. Oftentimes, you're not going to talk about risk management or cost optimization unless it's that time of the decade where budgets are being looked at very, very granularly. So if you want to truly have a governance discussion, I think it's really important to have some sort of guide, a table of contents, if you will. And that really brings me to the core of the topic today. I stumbled upon, and I even shared this with some of my contemporaries here at Planet who had never seen it as well, upon Microsoft's 5 disciplines of cloud governance. I was going through Microsoft Learn. If anybody uses that, oftentimes I'll use it when I have a conversation with a customer about a certain solution set or feature that maybe I'm knowledgeable at a 200 level and I just want to get to that 300 level to be able to help out a little bit more. I'll jump on Microsoft Learn. It's an extremely informative set of web pages there. And somehow I stumbled upon this and it just struck a chord with me. It struck a chord with me in a way that said, this is a way that I can now make sure that we have a comprehensive discussion with any customer about governance that includes all of the important areas that we need to talk about. And I think if you take a look at these 5, which I apologize, the last one says 2, but it is 5, that these really encompass the core foundations of a good quality governance conversation for your hybrid or cloud environment. And these are cost management, security baseline, identity baseline, resource consistency, and deployment acceleration. When you think about things like security, compliance, cost optimization, and risk management, you can see how they can easily fit in these 5 categories. And you can also see how easily a governance conversation can get sidetracked by just going down the rabbit holes of compliance and or security. So let's dive into each of these here. On the next slide here, we're going to start off with cost management. And this is actually my favorite one. There's a lot that can be done here. And for anybody who likes to invest in the stock market or look at financials and the economy, I think we all understand economies go up and down, and our economy has been going up for a long, long time. A lot of people are expecting to go down at some point. We're already starting to see budgets being frozen in some areas, in some industries, layoffs, and places like Microsoft and things like that. So I believe that cost management is a topic that over the next year or two will be an important conversation for all of us to have. Now, for each of these slides, I'm giving about 2 or 3 examples for both the Azure and the Microsoft 365 slide. These are not comprehensive in any way. These are just kind of getting you to noodle on some of these ideas and thoughts and how each of these buckets can pertain to you and your organization. They definitely dive into a lot more than just what I have here. I just grabbed a couple topics and talking to some of my peers at Microsoft, some of my peers at Planet Technologies. What are the things that are important to you? What's exciting to you? What are you hearing from your customers? And I bubbled these up to the top. So let's go ahead and dive in through some of these. For cost management around Azure, we have something, Microsoft used to use this term all the time. I don't see it so much anymore. I always liked it, called green IT, right? This is the ability to ensure that your Azure resources are running only when you need them to run. I can't tell you how many customers I work with, they deploy resources and they keep them running. I mean, it's just kind of a default thing. I've done it myself. As a matter of fact, I guarantee you I have some virtual machines running inside Azure right now that shouldn't be running. And this is essentially that ability to make that schedule, right? Do you need your development, your UAT, your test servers running on Saturday and Sunday? Most likely not. And it's very easy to set up a policy to ensure that those resources are spun down on the weekends or evenings and spun back up on Monday morning or whatever it is that you need. And there you're reducing probably a significant amount of monies that you can be saving there. So green IT, I think, is a fantastic way to really kickstart your cost savings abilities. With
Hey,
Azure
Scott,
Resource
on
Tagging,
that one hey Scott,
yes,
on that one specifically, not only is it saving money, right, but it's also a security gap. It's a security control as well. Why have something running if it doesn't need to be running, right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And a lot of the attacks that happen in Azure, as the attack goes through, say, email through identity, gets access to Azure. Now they're spinning up resources, right? So that's all part of that management to understand what should be running when, and have that plan in place.
Yeah.
So with resource tagging and Azure policies, right, these can work together to help your organization enforce governance and compliance policies in your Azure environment. Resource tagging is a feature that allows users to assign metadata to your Azure resources, such as VMs, storage accounts, databases. Tags consist of name value pairs, which can be used to categorize and organize resources, making it easier to manage and search for those resources. Policies, on the other hand, are a feature that allows administrators to define rules and restrictions for resources in your environment. Policies can also be used to enforce the compliance and security requirements, such as requiring encryption for storage accounts or limiting the types of virtual machines that can be deployed. That's a big one, right? I had a customer, had a developer who spun up a ginormous virtual machine and left it running for a month. And when the bill came in, all sorts of fire drills were being run, and then having to work with Microsoft to try to get that money back. So very important there. So when these are used together, your resource tagging and your policies are going to ensure that your resources are properly categorized and managed while also enforcing those compliance and security requirements. Another example is an organization might create an Azure policy that requires all virtual machines to be encrypted at rest. The policy can be configured to look for specific resource tags on your virtual machines, indicating that the VM is part of a particular project or application. If the tag is present, the policy will ensure that that VM is encrypted. Similarly, an organization might create a policy that restricts the type of VMs that can be deployed based on the value of a resource tag. For example, a tag might be used to indicate that a virtual machine is intended for deployment or testing purposes, and the policy may restrict the deployment of high-performance virtual machines for those purposes to avoid that example that I just gave previously. So using these together, you can ensure that your resources, again, are properly categorized, managed, and secured. Thirdly, here, we have Azure Advisor and Azure Cost Management. If you're not leveraging these tools today, you absolutely should be. They're powerful tools that can help your organization monitor and control their Azure spending. By setting the budget, the monitoring cost, and analyzing the usage patterns that you have within your organization, you can optimize your Azure usage benefits. So part of that green IT discussion, right? Start looking at, make a plan where you're looking at this bi-weekly, weekly, whatever it is, to ensure that you're following all of the policies that you want in place within your Azure environment. Conversely, on the Microsoft 365
Hold on a
side,
second. So on that one, Scott, right there, that
Yep.
we actually have a briefing on cost optimization for Azure. So if you're interested in that topic, by all means, leverage your you already own it benefits and get that session scheduled to
absolutely,
briefing.
absolutely, and I'm assuming we can do that for AWS as well if you're running those workloads. Very similar concepts. So on the Microsoft 365 side, there's so many things I could have put in here, and I was working with Matt Barger, who's our tremendous architect here at Planet Technologies. Just so many ideas of what we could have put in here. First and foremost, from my past experiences, number one, licensing management, right? The ability to automate when an employee comes on board, that they're assigned the proper licensing within the cloud, and more importantly, perhaps, when they leave the organization, that those licenses are reallocated and put into the pool. I once was hired to help a customer, very, very large customer, to hire an intern essentially to sit in their organization and literally go through their entire 263,000 Azure Active Directory users and remove the people who are no longer there and reallocate those licenses. They were literally buying new licenses every time they hired somebody, and they have far more than they actually needed to have. So and we can easily do this with Power Apps, Power Automate, right? For HR, when you're onboarding and offboarding employees, to make sure that this is something that is occurring without you having to do anything.
Yeah,
So
getting rid of those licenses add up quickly. I mean, if you're talking $400, you know, an E3 or E5 or M365 E5, whew, you're talking thousands of licenses that are sitting there at a huge tenant. That's a lot of money sitting there that could be reutilized.
Absolutely.
Huge.
With cloud application governance, this was always one of my favorites, right? When they call it Defender for Cloud Apps today, but when MCAS originally came out, one of the most enjoyable experiences was deploying that and allowing CTOs see what all of the applications their employees are using. And you would see, 5, 6, 7 different types of file storage solutions and things like that. Where this becomes an issue is your organization most likely is spending a lot of time, effort, and money in putting together policies and protections and security around your data governance, right? So if you're, say it's Google Docs you're using, right? You're deploying all of these solutions around securing that, and then somebody goes out and uses, some totally different third-party file storage. That data is now outside of your purview, right? It's now outside of your ability to control. So cloud application governance, or specifically leveraging cloud app security within Defender for Cloud Apps, is this tool that will allow you to see the insights of what your users are using, what services they're using. You can monitor their app usage. You can identify unused or underutilized apps and services and remove them to avoid unnecessary costs, right? This is also great to see if you are pushing OneDrive and you're not getting users adoption into that. You might need some adoption help, right, to get folks maybe more educated on the product or features to help with that adoption within your organization. SharePoint governance. I must have put 1,000 different things here in this spot, and I ended up just calling it SharePoint governance because
collaboration governance. Yeah.
SharePoint is still probably the most popular content management platform in the world, and certainly within Microsoft 365. So implementing proper SharePoint governance controls, such as lifecycle management, retention policies, permissions management, can all help your organization reduce costs by avoiding unnecessary storage usage and maintaining the compliance with your data retention regulations. So these are just a couple examples of cost savings governance controls in 365. There are a lot more. They're extremely important. And again, I think over the next 12, 24 months, they're going to become even more and more important to your organization. So in looking at the, yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say that cloud application governance, not only is it a way to reduce cost by, reducing the number of collaboration tools, but obviously the security risks associated with multiple collaboration tools. Being able to, create sanctioned versus unsanctioned tools for the organization is a huge capability of Defender for Cloud Apps. So just something to take a serious look at there. Thanks, Scott.
Absolutely. And looking at the next pillar within the Microsoft Cloud governance disciplines, security baseline, right? This is, I think we're all familiar with this one. This is a lot of times what a quote unquote governance conversations will delve into. But within the security baseline, we start to get a clear view of why this shift occurs. And as you can see, there's a lot of overlap between these three discussions. However, I still maintain that governance deserves its own dedicated time and thought. And I hope, again, by the end of this presentation, you will too. So within Azure, I'm just going to cover a couple of these for Azure and Microsoft 365. I tried to find ones that weren't just, duh, you know what I mean? Ones that you guys talk about all the time. Tried to find some things that maybe we don't talk about as much. Privileged access in Azure, right, refers to the access that you grant to users who need to perform certain admin tasks or actions that require elevated privileges. These users are often referred to as privileged users and are typically authorized to perform tasks that involve sensitive data, systems configurations, or resource management. To ensure that privileged access is secure and controlled, Azure actually provides a couple different ways, a couple different features and tools, if you will, to manage the privileged access. Role-based access controls, RBAC, is a feature that allows admins to grant permissions to users based on their role or job function. Just-in-time access is a feature that allows admins to grant temporary access to users for a specific amount of time. And then PIM, privileged identity management, is the feature that provides a centralized and automated way to manage privileged access to your Azure resources. So leveraging all of these features and tool sets together, it's extremely important to ensure that only people who should have access to certain resources, when they should have access to certain resources, and you can make that happen and lock that down. Next, we have Azure policies that we talked about a little bit earlier in terms with tagging, but I just want to touch how Azure policies address security in a couple different ways. Compliance. Right? From a compliance perspective, it could be used to ensure that resources in Azure environment comply with your security standards and regulations. In terms of risk mitigations, policies can help mitigate security risk by enforcing your security best practices, such as requiring multi-factor authentication, enforcing password policies, or restricting network access, things of that nature. With consistency, right? We talked about that with the tagging. It helps ensure that your security settings are consistently applied across all resources in Azure environment. Again, leveraging tagging, so certain policies are applied to certain things or certain application workload groups, or whatever, however it is that you want to break that down. And then with monitoring and remediation, policies can help or can be used to monitor resources for security issues and automatically remediate those. Like, for example, policies can be configured to audit logs and detect potential security threats, such as unauthorized access attempts or changes to security settings. That's a big one, right? You kind of want to know when changes are made to your security settings. The third one was brought to me by a friend of mine at Microsoft, and because he runs into this all the time, and I thought it was absolutely a fantastic example here. Not all of my customers, shockingly, use Azure Sentinel. I wish they would, but we understand, there still is a lot of on-premise SIEM tools out there, so migration's happening, but it takes time, just like anything else. Also, with that Defender for Cloud as well. There are no-cost versions of both of these available to you, and I highly, highly recommend that you turn these on and take a look at them. Yes, does Microsoft make this available to you? Because you'll look at it, you'll start falling in love with it, you'll want more, you'll buy it, you'll start using it. Yeah, I mean, that's how Microsoft works. But that's but the key is that you're turning these things on and you do see the value. It's one thing for somebody like Ken or myself or one of our cloud strategists or engineers here at Planet Technologies come in and talk your ear off about it. It's another to actually take a look at it and see what's actually going on. So, I mean, when you turn these on, you'll get real-time security alerts, you get risk-based identity protection alerts, threat detection and investigation, integration with Microsoft Graph Security API, 30 days of data retention for the Microsoft 365 side of the house. So there's a lot that's there for you. If you haven't just turned it on just to play around with it and take a look at it, highly recommend you do. Again, it's one thing to hear about, it's one thing to see it. So highly recommend that. On the Microsoft 365 side, again, 1,000 different things I could have put here, but I just wanted to go over these three real quick, as they tend to be topics of conversation multiple times with a single customer, right? We will have these conversations year over year because things do change, needs change, and of course a lot of times these solutions change a little bit here and there, and we have to understand how they work. So with external sharing, with Microsoft 365 allows your organization to create and enforce sharing policies that control the level of the external sharing in their environment, right? Admins can create policies that control who can share content with external users, what types of content can be shared, and how external users can access that content. You have things like guest access, right, which allow external users to access shared content without requiring a Microsoft account. Admins can enable or disable guest access for different Microsoft 365 services, such as SharePoint and Teams. You have features like sharing links. 365 offers different types of sharing links, such as anonymous links, internal links, external links, that provide varying levels of access to shared content. Admins can control the types of links that users can create and share and enforce expiration policies for those shared links. Things like access requests. access requests to share content that they don't have permissions to access. Admins can control how that access requests are handled, such as requiring approval for those access requests and setting notification settings for those access requests. So there's a lot within external sharing. It covers a ton. So it's always a good conversation to have. Conditional access is a policy-based access control feature that allows organizations to define access rules based on user, device, and location. By implementing the conditional access policies, your organization can restrict access to sensitive data and resources and prevent unauthorized access. DLP is a conversation at Planet we probably have here a dozen times a week. It's usually embedded in a bunch of other conversations, but it's always a topic of conversation. And so we're all pretty familiar with it, but it's something that needs to be in place. It's a set of policies and controls that help prevent sensitive data from being shared or leaked outside the organization. By implementing these policies for email, SharePoint, OneDrive, organizations can prevent accidental or intentional data leaks and comply with their data protection regulations. So these are just a couple examples of the security baseline discipline. Ken, if you have anything to add.
I think you covered it.
Fantastic.
Not gonna interrupt.
Yeah, so the identity baseline, there's a lot here. So I actually had to get caught up because while I am familiar with Microsoft Entra, and by the way, I'm betting anybody $10 that within 2 years this will no longer be called Entra. I don't know, it just doesn't roll off
You're
the tongue.
probably right, Scott. I'd love to guess what it is going to be called. I have no idea.
Yeah. I get this sense that they're going to change his name or they're going to bottle it up and add it to some other product base, right? But when Entra first rolled out, it was 3 components. The first 3 that you see here, Azure AD, which we all know and love, permissions management, verified ID. But then they just recently added 2 more as well, Entra Identity Governance and Entra Workload Identities. And when I saw this, I said, wow, what am I going to speak about this? And it hit me. It's a governance discussion. So Entra Identity Governance sounds like the thing to really hone in on. So this is kind of a quote unquote new solution, everybody. It's really a couple solutions that were already there, rebranded with some new features. And Microsoft Entra Identity Governance is kind of one of those new features. Microsoft Entra Identity Governance is a comprehensive solution that helps organizations manage access to their critical resources across hybrid environments and cross-cloud environments. It provides a centralized platform for managing user identities, access requests, access certification, role management, and privileged access management. Essentially, what Entra is meant to be moving forward in the future is your one-stop shop for identity and its management and its protection and its access grants and its administration for everything, for AWS, for Google Cloud, for your on-premise environment, for everything. That's where this is going. So I just wanted to highlight this real quick because identity is going to be a part of every governance discussion, mainly because it's part of every compliance and security discussion, right? So I just wanted to highlight this identity baseline discipline here. Other than that, I highly recommend, if you're not familiar with the Entra product family, reach out to your account executive, get on a call with your cloud strategist, and we'd be more than happy to dive a little bit deeper into what all of this entails. Okay. On the next discipline, we have resource consistency. Resource consistency governance controls in Azure refers to the policies and procedures that organizations can implement to ensure that their resources, again, such as VMs, databases, storage accounts, are consistent and follow that standardized structure. Again, Azure policy is a highlight here. We all kind of understand that now. You can start to see some of the Azure tools that span this gamut for governance, right? Azure policy is one of those. So we've covered that one. With Azure Resource Manager, your ARM templates, these are essentially JSON files that define the infrastructure and configuration of Azure resources. Your admins can create and manage ARM templates to ensure that new resources follow a standardized structure and contain the required features and configurations for everything that you stand up. Similarly, Azure Blueprints provides a way to orchestrate the deployment of Azure resources and ensure that they follow organizational standards and best practices. Admins can use Blueprints to create repeatable, consistent, and compliant environments across multiple subscriptions and regions. Within the Microsoft 365 side of the house, again, cloud apps, we've talked about that consistency, right? If you're going to leverage OneDrive as your file storage, your individual user file storage, then you want that to be consistent across your organization. You typically don't want multiple individual file storage solutions that you have to help protect and provide compliance around. Information architecture refers to the organization and structure of content within a site, SharePoint site. By implementing information architecture governance controls such as content types and metadata, your admins can ensure that content is consistent and can be easily discovered and managed. Similarly, with site lifecycle management, 365 offers this capability that allows admins to control how long sites are retained and when they are deleted. By implementing this site lifecycle management set of policies, admins can ensure that sites are archived or deleted according to a consistent process. So again, touching on a lot of the SharePoint areas as well, because again, everybody uses it for the most part. Still the biggest solution in the world on the 365 side.
I would say a couple other ones like Teams templates, right? To make sure that those teams are set up in a consistent, standardized way all the time, and licensing groups, for group management of licensing. That's always an easier way to manage licensing for onboarding users and things like that. So that it's a consistent process for licensing.
Absolutely. Okay, on the last discipline here, we have deployment acceleration. And there's a lot you can do here. When I say there's a lot you can do here, in what I have here, just two of the three examples are extremely large and robust topics. We could spend hours just talking about how DevOps and Azure Resource Manager can help your deployment acceleration, how Zero Trust Ramp is. So I'm going to touch on it here today. But again, these are conversations worthy of much deeper thought and analysis of how it could help you and your organization. When we're talking about deployment acceleration, governance controls, we're essentially referring to the policies and procedures that you can implement to ensure that deployment of cloud resources are efficient and streamlined. All right, so I put here deploy secure landing zones. This is basically infrastructure as a code, and we talked a little bit about this on a previous discipline as well, being able to put out entire environments by streamlining its deployment via code. Secure landing zones are a great example of this. We do a lot of this here at Planet Technologies for education, universities that have research facilities that need to stand up an Azure environment quickly, that are by default out of the box, secure and compliant for all of the various compliances that are required for that type of workload and for research. So this enables you to stand these environments up, and you are good to go day one at a specific baseline. Now, do you maybe need to tweak things for your own personal instance? Perhaps, but this gives you those baselines that everybody needs pretty much out of the box. So that's basically an infrastructure as a code concept. With DevOps and automation practices, your organization can accelerate the deployment process and ensure that resources are deployed, again, consistently and reliably. That's basically what allows that deployment acceleration. The ARM templates can be used to define the infrastructure and configuration of almost every Azure resource, allowing your admins to create that repeatable and consistent deployment of resources throughout your organization. ARM templates can be used with automation tools such as Azure DevOps to help that deployment process be more holistic in terms of your workload and what's going out there into the cloud. With Microsoft 365, I put in the Zero Trust Ramp framework because it really leads into my final point of how are you defending that, which I got from a friend and of a conversation that he gives to his customers that I really liked, and I hope Well, I want to share that with everybody and hope there's some value there. But with the zero trust ramp, let's understand what it is. It's a framework for implementing zero trust security in your organization. The ramp stands for risk-based, adaptive, multi-factor authentication, and platform agnostic, right? So I would just want to dive into each of those a little bit more. The risk-based the risk-based approach to security. This means that the security controls that are implemented are based on an assessment of risk associated with a particular asset or user. By taking the risk-based approach, organizations can ensure that their security controls are tailored to the specific needs of their environment. It's adaptive, essentially meaning that security controls are continuously evaluated and adjusted based on changes to the environment. Multi-factor authentication, we all know what that is and are very, very familiar with it, but it's also platform agnostic, meaning that it can be applied to any platform or technology. So the reason I bring that up is, one, if you have this framework in place, again, like the infrastructure as a code example with secure landing zones, you have your core baseline configuration for security on a specific level around zero trust. And that allows you to move from there and cover a lot of the bases, right? You think of it, you're in the red zone, right? you're about to score a touchdown. You have other things to do, certainly, but you've got it down to the 20-yard line, which brings into the concept of asking yourself, how do I defend that, right? So each time you deploy a new solution in the cloud, there's a security principle that emphasizes the need for proactive security measures in cloud computing, right? When organizations plan for this, it allows them to accelerate deployments of new solutions by incorporating security into the process itself from the outset. They can use pre-approved security controls and configurations that have already been tested rather than having to identify and develop new ones for each solution. So essentially, when you go and deploy something, right? We have organizations that are leveraging most of Microsoft 365, and then they want to turn on OneDrive, right? If you have your security and compliance solutions in place on that baseline level, as you start to deploy new solutions, that's covered. It's not that you're deploying a solution and then saying, okay, how do we solve it now, right? So it's not, if we're in Teams, let's not address external sharing, but when we get to OneDrive, what are we going to do if somebody wants to share a piece of their data externally, right? Get these policies, right? Get these roadmaps in place of how you want to secure these things now, so that as you start to deploy them in the future, that foundation is already there, okay? So how do we go about achieving good cloud governance within your organization? There's a couple stakes. Where do you go from here, right? You've just heard me talk for, I don't know, 40 minutes. A lot of information was out there. You might have heard a couple features that perked your ears up, but ultimately, what's your next step to achieve good cloud governance within your organization? One step a lot of organizations take is to establish a governance council or team or group, right? This should be formed with representatives from various business groups, IT, security, and your legal team. A lot of people leave out the legal team, believe it or not, but they certainly bring a perspective that brings a ton of value to a governance discussion. Basically, this council should be responsible for defining policies, procedures, and guidelines for cloud adoption and management, right? Setting that foundation. So you're answering that, how do I defend that, regardless of what you deploy? Next, you're going to define cloud policies and procedures. These should be established for cloud adoption, management, security, compliance, and cost management. These policies should align with the organization's overall objectives, regulatory requirements, and risk management strategies. Then, of course, you want to select the right cloud services and vendors to ensure that they meet the organization's security and compliance and performance requirements. This has gotten a little bit easier over the years, right? AWS, Microsoft Cloud, they pretty much have every avenue covered here in terms of what most organizations need from a base compliance and security out of the box from their end of the picking up the couch, right? They got their picking up the couch covered. You want to monitor your cloud usage and performance, right? We talked about some of the other tools like Defender for Cloud and things of that nature. They're going to allow you to continuously monitor your cloud usage and performance to ensure that your resources are being used efficiently and effectively. Monitoring should include cloud service availability, performance, and utilizations. Metrics should be identified and established to measure performance against business objectives, right? Then you want to conduct your regular audits, right, and assessments of all of these logs and policies against your policies and procedures and best practices. Any of these discrepancies should be addressed promptly. Providing training and education to the employees to ensure that they're aware of cloud policies and procedures and best practices. This includes your IT, right? As you start to, say, leverage tagging inside of Azure, have them understand, make sure they're part of that process too. Why are we putting these tags in place? What policies are we enforcing in each of these tags, right? There needs to be that education and documentation as well, right? So as new employees, just to continue along that IT example, as new employees join IT, right, they have the ability to kind of pick up where everybody else has left off pretty seamlessly. And then you want to continuously review and improve, right? It's an ongoing process. Cloud governance is a conversation that should not end, right? Just like you think, I'm sure everybody on this call would agree, security conversation should never end. And security is part of governance. Governance conversation should never end. You should regularly review your policies, procedures, and metrics to ensure, again, that they align with your business goals. Just one last thing. Ken mentioned my blog post is up. Please click on it, send it to family members, have them click on it. I would love my boss to see it as the most viewed blog post ever. I think I'll win a car or something like that. So please send that out and please give it a read. It's really just a review of what I've gone over here. It's really ultimately, if you just want to see the Microsoft 5 disciplines and a quick description of each, just to refresh your memory when you want to, go there and check it out. I appreciate everybody's time. I want to thank you for being an attentive audience. I hope you found this presentation informative and enjoyable. And if you didn't, at least my part's over now. So I'm going to pass it over to Ken in case there's any.
We're going to have, hopefully we'll have some questions. So start thinking of some questions while we ask this last poll, right? So obviously today you heard Scott talk about the 5 disciplines: cost management, security baseline, identity baseline, resource consistency, deployment acceleration. And then at the very end, they kind of wrapped up with the whole idea of this governance council or governance team or board setup. We're kind of curious to know, future, you already own it moving forward. If you're interested in digging deep into any one of these, multiple of these, or, just let us know what you're thinking. If we'd be happy to tailor a session in the future to one or all of these. So just let us know. And we'll look at the poll results here in a second. Oh, interesting. The big results on the governance team board setup. That's interesting. And it's definitely an area that, it's the soft side of this governance discussion, right? It's the organizational readiness side, which is something I am super familiar with. I give this talk a lot to my customers about what does it take to set up a governance board, why you'd want to have one, what kind of decisions they make, and all that. So happy to have that discussion with anybody. But it sounds like we may be doing a YouAlreadyOwnIt, so hang tight for a little bit on that. We did have some questions, or at least a question come in from the audience, at least one, and I kind of need a little bit more information from the person who asked the question. The question was, how does governance overlap, or doesn't it overlap, between admin centers, Power Platform versus SharePoint versus Microsoft 365? So if you can come off mute, we'd be happy to try our answer on that one. And so if the person who asked that question is still online, if they could just kind of go a little bit further about what they're kind of asking there, I'd really appreciate someone can answer your question.
And Ken, do you want to stop the recording in case?
Oh, yeah. Let's go ahead and stop the recording. This way you guys are free to comment about your organizations,